The moment the wheels of my daughter's luxury sedan spun gravel into my face, just after she'd left me on the side of a forgotten highway, she said, "This is your new life, Mother. The bookstore and the house belong to us now." I watched the car shrink into a silver speck against the vast Arizona sky, clutching the worn leather strap of my handbag. No wallet, no cell phone, just an old woman left in the desert heat. But as the silence settled, a strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't despair. It was the electrifying calm of a general before a battle she knew she was about to win. My children had no idea what I had done in the final weeks of their father's life. I'm going to tell you the whole story. But first, a warm hello to everyone watching Grandma's Daily Story. Thank you for being here. Please take a moment to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're joining me from. It warms my heart to see how far our stories travel. Today's special greeting goes out to Brenda McCarthy from Dublin, Ireland. Brenda, thank you for being a cherished member of our growing family. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Martha Blackwood. At least, it has been since I married my Arthur in 1978. For 45 years, I was his partner in everything, from raising our 2 children, Eleanor and Leo, to building our life's work from the ground up. Blackwood Books and Press, a little sanctuary of literature nestled in the heart of Sedona. I am 70 years old, with hands that show a life of turning pages, packing boxes of books, and wiping away the tears of my children. These are the same hands that held Arthur's as he took his last breath 6 weeks ago, his body finally succumbing to a cruel fight with pancreatic cancer. It was a slow, agonizing decline that gave us too much time to think and not nearly enough time to prepare for the quiet that would follow. We decided to keep the severity of his illness to ourselves initially. Our children were so consumed by their own worlds. Eleanor, a wellness influencer in Los Angeles, was always in the midst of a dramatic rebranding that required a significant investment from her father. Leo was perpetually chasing the next big tech breakthrough in San Francisco, a series of costly failures funded by our bookstore's steady, quiet profits. "They have enough on their plates, Marty," Arthur would say, his voice thinned by the morphine. "Let's not burden them with this until we have to." I went along with it, wanting to protect him from any stress, but a part of me knew better. I should have seen the foundation of their characters had long been set in sand. They finally returned to our stone and timber home, the one attached to the bookstore where they'd spent their childhoods, not with arms open for comfort, but with calculators in their eyes. The same home where Arthur and I had transformed a dusty, forgotten shop into the most beloved independent bookstore in northern Arizona, a place where authors came to read and readers came to dream. Their visit wasn't about solace. It was a reconnaissance mission. "Mom, you have to be practical," Eleanor began, her voice dripping with the feigned empathy she used on her followers. We were in the sun-drenched reading nook, Arthur resting upstairs. Dad's medical care must have been astronomical. Have you considered what this place is really worth? The bookstore, the very place she'd once called a prison of old paper and dust, was suddenly a prime piece of real estate in her mind. Eleanor had fled to LA the moment she turned 18, claiming Sedona was a spiritual graveyard for anyone with real ambition. Her visits were rare, transactional, and usually coincided with a need for a down payment or a new business venture. Yet here she was, her father fading away upstairs, suddenly an expert on our assets. Leo arrived a day later, stepping out of a leased sports car that screamed financial irresponsibility. He wore a designer suit that probably cost more than our monthly utilities. His track record was a string of failed apps and broken promises, each venture launched with a passionate pitch to his father and ending in a quiet, costly collapse. He was a master of performative affection, though. He held Arthur's hand, read him passages from his favorite poets, and for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to believe that the son I had raised was still in there somewhere. That flicker of hope is what made the betrayal cut so much deeper. The memorial service was beautiful, filled with the scent of old books and fresh coffee, just as Arthur would have wanted. We held it right in the bookstore. Friends, authors, and loyal customers from decades past filled the aisles, sharing stories of Arthur's kindness. How he'd hand-deliver books to the elderly, how he'd started a literacy program at the local school, how he'd given a young, unpublished author his first break through our small press. I stood between Eleanor and Leo, a fortress of grief, feeling their presence not as a comfort, but as a weight. Eleanor's arm was a rigid, obligatory gesture. Leo produced tears, but they seemed hollow, a performance for the crowd. "He's in a better story now," our friend, a retired professor, said during his eulogy. I clung to that thought, hoping it was more than just a well-intentioned platitude. Arthur and I weren't religious, but we believed in the immortality of stories, the idea that a good life, like a good book, lives on long after the final page is turned. What struck me most in the days that followed was the profound emptiness of the house. The quiet was a physical presence, a constant reminder of his absence. Our community wrapped us in a cocoon of casseroles and condolences, people speaking in hushed tones about Arthur's legacy. They talked about the business he built, the community he fostered. But no one mentioned the 2 children who seemed to have inherited his name, but none of his substance. That evening, as the last of the well-wishers departed, I turned to my children. "I've made up the guest rooms for you. I thought tomorrow we could start going through some of your father's old photographs, share some memories." Eleanor exchanged a look with Leo before setting her wine glass down with a decisive click. "Actually, Mom," she said, her tone shifting from grieving daughter to CEO. "Leo and I were thinking it's best to handle the official business first. We both have demanding careers to get back to." "Handle the business." The words felt like ice in my veins. "The house stuff," Leo clarified, avoiding my gaze, his eyes fixed on a scuff on his expensive Italian shoes. "The press, the bookstore. We need to establish a path forward." I had braced myself for sorrow, for shared grief, for a nostalgic journey through our family's past. What I received was a corporate takeover. Eleanor opened a sleek silver laptop on the old oak dining table, the very table where we had marked birthdays and celebrated publishing their first children's book. "Dad and I discussed this a few months ago," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "He was concerned about you, Mom, about the stress of running everything by yourself. The industry is changing. The business needs a capital injection, a modern strategy." "This house is more than I can handle alone?" The words tasted like ash. "I have managed the finances and operations of this bookstore alongside your father for 45 years, I said, my voice dangerously low. "We built it together." "And you did a fantastic job for your time," Leo chimed in, using the condescendingly smooth tone he reserved for reluctant investors. "But it's about securing your future now. We've found a wonderful assisted living community in Phoenix. It has a pool, social clubs, people your own age. I have friends here. I have a life's work here," I retorted, the sound of my own voice unfamiliar, hardened. "This is my home." "It's a family asset, Mom," Eleanor corrected, her patience wearing thin. "And Dad left the business to Leo and me in his will. He trusted us to make the right decisions for the family's future, and that includes your care." I stared at this woman in her designer athleisure wear, a stranger who knew more about brand synergy than she did about the rare first editions sitting on the shelves just feet away. The books that had paid for her private education and funded her frivolous life. "Let me see this will." She produced a set of documents from a leather portfolio. The letterhead wasn't from our trusted family attorney, a man who had advised us for 30 years, but from a corporate law firm in Los Angeles I'd never heard of. Arthur's signature was on the last page, but it was too steady, too precise. It lacked the slight tremor that had afflicted his hand for the last year of his life, a casualty of his illness and the heavy medication. "You had him sign this when he was sick," I accused, a cold fury rising within me. the protective instinct of a wife whose partner's legacy was being desecrated. "He was lucid and of sound mind," Eleanor insisted, her voice sharp. "He wanted this for us. He knew we could leverage the asset to build real wealth. A national bookstore chain has already made an offer for the property and the inventory." "A chain bookstore," Leo elaborated, his eyes gleaming with a familiar, desperate avarice. "They're offering 7 figures, Mom. Enough for us all to have a truly fresh start." A fresh start. The phrase was an insult. As if the life Arthur and I had painstakingly built, book by book, was a failed experiment. As if Blackwood Books and Press, a beacon of culture in our town, our tradition of championing local authors, our commitment to the tangible magic of paper and ink, was nothing more than a teardown, destined to become another soulless outlet in a corporate empire. "Your father would have burned this place to the ground before selling it to a soulless corporation," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't felt in years. "And I will never, ever agree to this." "Your agreement, unfortunately, isn't required," Eleanor said, the mask of compassion falling away completely to reveal the cold, hard ambition beneath. "The business and the property were solely in Dad's name, a technicality from when you incorporated. Under state law, as his direct heirs with a signed will, it all passes to us." That's when I knew. This wasn't a recent scheme hatched in the shadow of his illness. This was a vulture's patient wait. How long had they been circling, waiting for him to weaken, waiting for their moment to swoop in and pick the bones of the life he had built? How many of Leo's phone calls, supposedly to check on his father's health, were actually probes to see how much time was left on the clock? "I need some air," I managed to say, pushing my chair back from the table. "I'm going to my room." "Of course, Mom," Leo said, already looking back at the laptop screen. "We can finalize the details tomorrow, but there would be no finalization. Not on their terms." As I lay in the bed I had shared with my husband for nearly half a century, the familiar creaks of the old house sounded like mournful sighs. I didn't sleep. I listened to the low murmur of my children's voices from downstairs, the clinking of wine glasses, the sound of them carving up my future. I was planning too. Morning arrived with the aroma of imported artisanal coffee, the kind Eleanor considered the only acceptable option. I dressed slowly, my body aching with a grief that had now been compounded by betrayal. When I descended the stairs, they were waiting for me in the foyer. A small, unfamiliar suitcase stood by the door. "We packed a few essentials for you," Leo announced with a disturbingly bright smile. "We thought we'd take a drive today, go and tour the Acacia Senior Oasis in Phoenix. It gets 5-star reviews." "I'm not going to any oasis," I said, my hand steady as I reached for the old porcelain mug Arthur had used every morning. "This is my home. This is where I'm staying." "Mom, don't make this difficult," Eleanor sighed, tapping her foot impatiently. "The contracts are being drawn up. The buyers from Book Nook Inc. are flying in next week. You can't stay here while the property is in escrow." I looked at my daughter, at her perfectly sculpted face, and saw no trace of the little girl who used to curl up in my lap while I read her stories. The girl who had written her own little book at age 7, which we had proudly published through our press. I saw only a predator who viewed her own mother as an inconvenient obstacle. "I just need to go upstairs for a moment," I said, my voice a quiet murmur. "I need my heart medication. And I want to grab a few family albums." "Take your time," Leo said, visibly relieved by my apparent compliance. "Pack whatever you need. We can have the rest shipped to you." I walked through my home for what I knew might be the last time. My fingers traced the spines of the books lining the hallway, each one a memory. I paused at the small, framed photos on the wall. Eleanor's graduation, Leo's first Little League game, family vacations to the coast. In the master bathroom, behind the medicine cabinet, was a small hidden compartment Arthur had built years ago. Inside, I retrieved not just my medication, but my passport, a bundle of emergency cash, and a slim manila folder. In the back of our shared closet, tucked away in a hatbox on the highest shelf, was a small, unassuming binder. The one thing my children, in all their greedy calculations, had never known existed. When I returned downstairs, my handbag was heavier, but my spirit felt strangely buoyant. Eleanor was glancing at her smartwatch. "All set?" she asked, her voice clipped. I gave a single, slow nod, allowing Leo to take my elbow in a mockery of gentlemanly concern, as if I were the frail, confused woman they desperately needed me to be. The drive was silent. I sat in the back of Eleanor's pristine electric SUV, the smell of new leather and jasmine air freshener feeling alien and sterile. I watched our bookstore, our home, recede in the rearview mirror, etching the image of the hand-carved Blackwood Books sign into my memory. We drove through the familiar streets of Sedona, past the library where I volunteered, past the cafe where Arthur and I had our first date. But instead of merging onto the I-17 south toward Phoenix, toward the Acacia Senior Oasis, Eleanor took a sharp turn onto a desolate, winding road that led out toward the empty desert. An hour later, with nothing but red rock formations and skeletal cacti around us, she pulled the car onto the dusty shoulder. The engine hummed quietly as she twisted in her seat to face me. "This is where you get off, Mom," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "The house and the bookstore are ours now." Michael, at least, had the decency to look conflicted. In my story, Leo just stared straight ahead. "Eleanor, what is this?" he asked, his voice a low tremor. "This isn't what we talked about." "This is the cleanest way," she shot back, her voice like cracking ice. "She'll just be a problem. She'll call her lawyer, talk to her friends in town, try to rally the community and stop the sale. She'll make us look like monsters." The irony of her words was apparently lost on her. "She has her medication. There's a small town with a bus station about 10 miles down this road. She's resourceful. She can call someone from there." She reached over the seat, her long manicured fingers pressing the button to unlock my door. "Get out." I looked at my daughter, this stranger who shared my blood but not my heart, and saw only a vast empty void. Then my gaze shifted to my son, the boy I had raised to be a good man, who was now staring at his own reflection in the side window, unable to meet my eyes. "Leo," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but I didn't need his answer. His silence was his complicity. He would follow his sister's lead. He always had. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he mumbled, his voice thick. "It's just, the offer from Book Nook is too good. My new app needs seed funding, and I'm in a lot of trouble with my last investors." I took a deep breath, picking up my handbag and the small suitcase. I stepped out of the air-conditioned car and into the blistering Arizona sun. The air was dry and smelled of dust and creosote. I stood on the side of the road as Eleanor hit the accelerator, the car kicking up a cloud of red dust that coated my clothes and stung my eyes. Leo's pale, haunted face was visible for a moment in the rear window, a fleeting image of a man who had just sold his soul, before the car crested a rise and vanished. They thought they had left me with nothing. An old woman, abandoned and helpless. But as the sound of the engine faded into the immense silence of the desert, I realized they had given me the one thing I needed most. I wasn't stranded. I was unleashed. Unleashed from the burden of pretending my children were people they were not. Unleashed from the slow, creeping heartbreak of watching them disappoint their father and themselves, time and time again. I began to walk, but not in the direction of the town 10 miles away. I was walking toward a different kind of future, one they could never have conceived of. Because in my handbag, nestled between my passport and my medication, was that unassuming binder. Inside it were the original notarized copyright contracts for the Adventures of Barnaby Bear book series. A collection of children's stories written by our dearest friend, a woman who had passed away years ago, leaving the rights not to Blackwood Books and Press, but to me, Martha Blackwood, personally. A series that had sold millions of copies worldwide. a media franchise with movies and merchandise, whose royalty checks had quietly funded every one of my children's failed dreams and expensive tastes. They had just stolen a bookstore. They were about to find out that they had left the gold mine behind, with the one person who knew exactly how to use it. The walk to the nearest sign of civilization was arduous, a grueling 5 miles under a relentless sun. My sensible shoes were not made for trekking across the desert, but with every step, my resolve hardened. By the time I limped into the dusty, sun-bleached outpost of Coyote Springs, my throat was parched and my feet were blistered, but my mind was a diamond, hard and clear. I found a small, run-down diner with a buzzing neon sign and collapsed into a cracked vinyl booth. A young waitress with kind eyes and a tired face brought me a glass of ice water that felt like the most luxurious thing I had ever tasted. "You all right, ma'am?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "You look like you've been through it." "Just a bit of car trouble," I lied easily. "Could I possibly use your telephone? My cell phone seems to have died." She led me to a payphone on the wall, a relic from another era. I didn't call one of my friends from Sedona, as Eleanor had so callously predicted. My first call was to Mr. David Sterling, our family attorney for 3 decades, a man who had known my children since they were infants. "Martha, I've been trying to reach you all morning." His voice boomed over the line, a mix of relief and anxiety. "I was expecting you for the official will reading an hour ago." A cold dread, colder than the ice water, trickled down my spine. "What will reading, David?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "The one your children scheduled. They brought in a document for my review yesterday, but Martha, it's not the will I drafted with Arthur last year. I have grave concerns about its authenticity. I've been trying to warn you." "I'm dealing with the consequences of that document right now, David," I said, my voice as steady as the rock formations I had just walked past. "I need your help, and I need absolute discretion. You have it, both. Where are you? Are you safe?" "I'm safe. Can you meet me at your office in 2 hours? I'll find a way there." "I'll be waiting," he said, his voice grim with purpose. Using the emergency cash from my purse, I bought a bus ticket from a sleepy depot that smelled of diesel and despair. I also purchased a cheap, prepaid cell phone from a gas station mart. Arthur had always been a firm believer in backup plans and hidden resources, a lesson his children had tragically failed to learn. As the bus rumbled toward Sedona, I didn't look at the passing scenery. I stared at my own reflection in the dusty window, and I did not see a victim. I saw a woman who had spent 45 years supporting a brilliant man, building a legacy, and raising 2 children. The children were a failed investment. But the legacy, I realized, was now mine alone to protect, and I would protect it with everything I had. David's office was a sanctuary of calm, filled with the scent of leather-bound books and his wife's famous lemon verbena tea. His secretary, a woman I'd known for years, gasped when she saw my disheveled state. "Mrs. Blackwood, my goodness, are you all right?" "I'm perfectly fine, Susan," I assured her, though my appearance told a different story. David met me at his office door, his face a mask of controlled fury. He was more than our lawyer. He had been Arthur's closest friend since their college days. He knew our family's every joy and every sorrow. "Martha," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he led me not to the client chairs, but to the comfortable sofa by the window. "Start from the beginning. Tell me everything." And so I did. I recounted the conversation after the memorial, the fraudulent will, the chilling drive into the desert, the abandonment. With every word, the color drained from David's face, replaced by a deep simmering rage that matched my own. "The document they showed me was a poorly executed forgery," he said when I had finished. "The real will Arthur and I finalized 6 months ago leaves everything, the house and the business, to you, in a living trust. The children were to inherit upon your passing, provided they demonstrated responsible stewardship." "I thought as much," I said, reaching into my handbag. I pulled out the binder and laid it on the coffee table between us. But they don't know about this. David opened the binder, and his eyes widened as he scanned the first page. He let out a low whistle. The Barnaby Bear copyrights. Martha, I had forgotten about this. Your friend, the author, she left these to you personally? She did, I confirmed. She trusted me more than any publisher. The royalties have always been paid into a separate account under my maiden name, an account the children know nothing about. It was our safety net. Arthur always said you never know when you'll need a lifeboat. David looked at the documents, then back at me, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. This isn't a lifeboat, Martha. This is an aircraft carrier. The intellectual property rights to this franchise are worth exponentially more than the physical bookstore. Any corporate entity like Book Nook Inc. would be buying the property primarily to get their hands on the exclusive publishing rights they think come with it. He placed the binder back on the table as if it were a sacred text. So, what is your next move? He asked, his eyes sharp. I looked him straight in the eye. I want my home back. I want my bookstore. And I want my children to understand the full and catastrophic consequences of their actions. A flicker of admiration shone in David's eyes. Let's get you settled somewhere safe for the night. My sister owns a lovely little inn just outside of town. Tomorrow we can begin filing the necessary legal motions. No, I said, shaking my head. That will take too long. They think they have a week before the buyers arrive. We need to move much, much faster than the law allows. A look of understanding dawned on his face. You're not planning a conventional legal battle, are you? Conventional people have the luxury of time, David, I said, my voice hardening. I am planning a war. That night, from the quiet, comfortable room at the inn, I began to weave my web. My first call wasn't to my children. Let them wonder. Let them imagine me wandering the desert, a confused old woman, a problem that had conveniently disappeared. My first call was to Helen Rodriguez, the senior vice president of commercial accounts at our bank, a woman I'd served with on the library board for 15 years. Martha, my deepest condolences about Arthur, she said warmly. Thank you, Helen. I'm calling on a matter of extreme urgency. I have reason to believe that fraudulent activity is about to occur concerning the Blackwood Books business accounts, and I need your help to lock them down immediately. My second call was to a man named Ben Carter, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who now ran a prominent investigative news site. Years ago, Blackwood Press had taken a chance on his first controversial book when no one else would. Martha, he said, his voice surprised but pleased. It's been too long. I was so sorry to hear about Arthur. He was a giant. He was, Ben. And now his legacy is under attack. I think I have a story for you. It's about corporate greed, elder abuse, and the weaponization of inheritance. My third call was to the American Booksellers Association, to a director I knew who was a fierce advocate for independent stores. My fourth was to the Authors Guild. My fifth was to the agent who handled the Barnaby Bear film rights. By midnight, I had made 9 calls. Each one was a seed planted in fertile ground. Outside my window, the stars glittered over the dark silhouette of the mountains, the same stars that were looking down on my children as they slept in my bed, in my home, dreaming of a future they had stolen. They had no idea the storm that was about to break over their heads. In the morning, I met David at a small cafe, a notebook filled with my overnight planning. First, I need you to file an emergency injunction to halt any potential sale of the property, citing a fraudulent will and suspected elder abuse, I instructed him. And I need you to get a temporary restraining order preventing my children from liquidating any business assets. David scanned my pages of notes, his expression a mixture of awe and alarm. You've mapped out their entire corporate structure. You have contacts at Book Nook's parent company. Arthur and I didn't just sell books for 45 years, I replied, taking a sip of my tea. We built a network. We built a reputation. I know who supplies our inventory, who holds our leases, who insures our property. I know where every single dollar comes from and where it goes. and I'm about to turn off all the taps. They will not go down without a fight, Martha, David warned, his voice serious. I'm counting on it, I said. By 11 a.m., the first tremors of the earthquake began. The emergency injunction was filed. Helen Rodriguez had flagged the business accounts for a fraud investigation, effectively freezing them. The ABA had issued an internal alert to its members about a potential hostile takeover of a legacy store under suspicious circumstances. At exactly 1:15 p.m., my new prepaid phone buzzed to life. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was. I let it ring 4 times before answering, my voice a placid sea of calm. Hello? Mom? What in God's name have you done? Eleanor's voice was a shriek of raw panic. I've merely taken steps to protect my property from thieves. Where are you? We've been worried sick. Leo's voice broke in, the lie so transparent it was almost laughable. They had me on speaker. No, you haven't, I replied calmly. You haven't called the police to report your elderly mother missing. You haven't called my friends. You haven't checked the hospitals. You've been too busy with your lawyers and your buyers to be worried. The only thing you're worried about is your deal falling through. That's not true, Mom, Eleanor protested, her voice strained. We were just giving you space. We can sort this out. You made a decision when you left me on that road, I said, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond. And now I am making mine. So listen very carefully, both of you. This is the one and only offer you will receive. You will meet David at his office, admit the will was a forgery, and sign a legally binding document relinquishing all claims to the house, the business, and any associated assets. In return, I will not pursue criminal charges. There was a brief, muffled conference on their end, and then Eleanor laughed, a brittle, ugly sound. You're bluffing. You have nothing. The will is ironclad. The will is a pathetic forgery, David's voice suddenly boomed. I had gestured for him to lean in toward the phone. And, as the attorney of record who holds the true and legal last will and testament of Arthur Blackwood, I will personally testify to that fact in a court of law. A fact which will land you both in prison for fraud. A stunned silence filled the line. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning to accept my mother's generous offer, I said softly. After that, the offer is rescinded, and I will be meeting with the district attorney. The choice is yours. I ended the call before they could utter another word. David leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. They're arrogant. They'll call your bluff. I know, I said, gathering my purse. That's the point. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I have an appointment with a journalist. The next 24 hours were a blur of calculated maneuvers. Ben Carter's initial story, posted late that night, was a masterpiece of insinuation. It didn't name my children directly, but told the story of a beloved local cultural institution being threatened by predatory corporate interests in the wake of its founder's death, hinting at allegations of elder exploitation and forged documents. The story was shared hundreds of times within an hour by the tight-knit community of independent booksellers across the country. By morning, the phone in David's office was ringing off the hook with calls from other bookstore owners offering support, and more importantly, from other journalists wanting to follow up on Ben's story. The 9 a.m. deadline came and went with no word from my children. As expected, their greed and arrogance had made them predictable. Time for phase 2, I said to David, pulling out my notebook. I spent the morning on the phone, leveraging the network I had built over a lifetime. I spoke with the head of a small, prestigious university press, suggesting we could co-sponsor a new literary prize in Arthur's name. I spoke with a wealthy philanthropist I knew from a charity board, and we discussed establishing a foundation to support struggling independent bookstores, with Blackwood Books as its headquarters. I was not just taking back my business, I was reimagining it, making it stronger and more vital than ever before. At noon, David received a call from Eleanor's LA lawyer, a man with a voice as slick as oiled marble. He threatened countersuits, accusations of libel, and challenged my mental competency. David simply laughed and told him to file whatever he liked. "The discovery process will be very illuminating," he told the man before hanging up. The real blow came at 3 p.m. I had saved my most powerful ally for last. I dialed a number in New York City, one I hadn't called in over a decade. "Silas, it's Martha Blackwood." Silas Croft was the legendary literary agent who had discovered our friend and her Barnaby Bear books all those years ago. He was a shark, the most feared and respected negotiator in the publishing world, and he had adored Arthur. I explained the situation to him in precise, unemotional detail. When I was finished, there was a long, dangerous silence on the line. "Those vultures," he finally hissed. "Martha, leave this to me. The CEO of Booknook's parent company is an old acquaintance. He's about to have a very, very bad afternoon." An hour later, my phone rang again. It was Eleanor, and the panic in her voice was no longer controlled. It was a raw, terrified scream. "The deal is off. Booknook just pulled their offer. Their lawyers said the property is legally compromised and poses a significant reputational risk. What did you do?" "I told you what I was going to do," I said calmly. "You chose not to listen. The offer I made you yesterday is now off the table." "What do you mean, off the table?" Leo whimpered in the background. "What do you want from us?" "What I want," I said, letting the silence hang in the air, "is a face-to-face meeting. My lawyer's office, 5 p.m., be there." When they arrived at David's office, just as the clock tower on Main Street struck 5, they looked like ghosts. My children, who had stood so tall and arrogant in my dining room just days before, were now stooped and pale, their expensive clothes looking more like costumes than armor. Eleanor's perfect makeup was smudged, and a frantic energy radiated from her. Leo's face was puffy, his eyes red-rimmed and darting around the room as if looking for an escape route that didn't exist. They were not alone. I had made sure of that. Sitting beside me and David was Silas Croft, the literary agent who had taken the first flight from JFK that morning. In his immaculate Savile Row suit, he looked like a bird of prey, his sharp eyes missing nothing. His presence alone changed the entire dynamic of the room, shifting it from a messy family dispute to a high-stakes corporate execution. They faltered at the sight of him. Eleanor clearly recognized him from industry magazines, and a fresh wave of panic washed over her face. "Sit down," David said, his voice flat and devoid of the warmth he had always shown them as they were growing up. He gestured to the 2 leather chairs opposite his desk, which now felt less like a piece of office furniture and more like a judge's bench. They sat, their movements stiff and awkward. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the quiet hum of the air conditioner. I let them stew in it for a full minute, watching them, studying the architects of my near destruction. I felt nothing. Not pity, not lingering affection. Just the cold, clear resolve of a surgeon about to excise a cancer. Robert, in the model script, was a business partner. Silas, as the powerful agent who controlled the rights to the true source of their wealth, was a far more terrifying figure for them to face. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries," Silas began, his voice a low, cultured growl that could peel paint. "You two have made a series of catastrophic errors. The first was underestimating your mother. The second was committing felony fraud. The third, and perhaps the most amusing from a legal standpoint, was attempting to fraudulently sell an asset whose most valuable component you didn't even know existed, let alone owned." He paused, letting the words sink in. Leo looked utterly bewildered. Eleanor's mind was clearly racing, trying to calculate angles that were no longer there. "Booknook Incorporated is, shall we say, displeased," Silas continued, a cruel little smile playing on his lips. "They are currently in discussions with their legal team about pursuing a suit against you both for fraudulent misrepresentation. Attempting to sell publishing rights you do not hold is a rather serious offense. It could tie you up in litigation and debt for the rest of your miserable lives." Eleanor found her voice, though it was thin and reedy. "That's not possible. The publishing rights are part of the press, part of the business." I finally spoke, my voice calm and measured. "No, Eleanor, they are not." I gestured to the binder that lay on David's desk. "The worldwide copyrights for The Adventures of Barnaby Bear, in perpetuity, were deeded to me, personally, by the author 30 years ago. The royalties from that franchise, the very money that has funded your apartments, your cars, your failed businesses, and your glamorous lifestyles for your entire adult lives, have always belonged to me. The bookstore you tried to steal was merely the house the golden goose lived in. You tried to sell the house while leaving the goose, and its golden eggs, with me." The color drained completely from Leo's face as the reality of his financial illiteracy hit him. He had never once questioned the source of the endless river of money, only that it flowed. Eleanor, however, understood immediately. Her face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Not at herself, but at me. For my prudence. For my foresight. "You lied to us," she hissed. "You let us believe—" "I let you believe nothing," I cut her off sharply. "I let you live a life of incredible privilege, funded by my assets. You never once asked about the specifics of the family finances. You only ever asked for more. Your ignorance is a product of your own entitlement, nothing more." David cleared his throat, bringing the focus back to the matter at hand. "As you know, your initial deal with Booknook is dead. Furthermore, any attempt to sell the physical property is now impossible due to the injunction and the glaring issue of the fraudulent will. As of this moment, you hold no legal claim to the house, the business, or any related assets. You are, to put it plainly, trespassing." He let that word hang in the air. Trespassing. In their own childhood home. "However," I said, leaning forward, "my original offer stands, with some new amendments. I am still willing to forgo pursuing criminal charges for forgery, elder abuse, and theft." A flicker of hope appeared in Leo's eyes. It was about to be extinguished. "These are my terms," I stated, my gaze locking onto both of them, daring them to look away. "First, you will sign the documents David has prepared. They acknowledge the will you presented as a forgery. They formally and irrevocably relinquish any and all current or future claims to the Blackwood estate, which includes the house, the business, all inventory, and all financial accounts." David slid a thick stack of papers across the desk. "Second," I continued, "you will both sign a legally binding non-disclosure agreement. You will never speak of this, or of me, or of your father's legacy, to anyone, for any reason. No tell-all blog posts, Eleanor. No sob stories to potential investors, Leo." Silas slid a second, thinner stack of papers next to the first. "Third," I said, my voice dropping lower, "the money is not gone. The loans and investments I have made to you over the past 20 years, which total over $3 million, are no longer gifts. David has drawn up documents acknowledging these disbursements as personal debts, owed by each of you to me. I will not actively collect on these debts, but they will be legally filed. Should either of you ever come into substantial wealth again, I will garnish every last cent with interest." This was the blow that finally broke them, the transformation of their safety net into a lifelong chain. Leo let out a small, choked sob. Eleanor just stared at the papers, her mind finally grasping the totality of her ruin. But we'll have nothing," she whispered, the fight finally gone from her voice. "You already had everything," I replied, the words sharp as glass. "You had a home, a legacy, and a mother who loved you. You burned it all down for a quick payday. Nothing is the price of arson." "There is one final condition," I said. "Before you leave this office, you will each write a letter, not to me. I have no more use for your words. You will write a letter of apology to your father. You will detail what you did and why you did it, David will keep them in his safe. Perhaps one day, if you ever truly understand the gravity of what you have done, they will serve as the first step in your own private redemption. But I doubt it. Michael in the original story cried. My Leo did too, but my Eleanor was made of colder stuff until the very end. This is insane, Eleanor whispered, shaking her head. It's blackmail. No, Silas corrected her smoothly. This is a gift. The alternative is that your mother walks out of this office. I call the district attorney. A charming woman, I'm told. And you are both charged with multiple felonies. Your pictures will be on the news tonight. Your assets, what little you legally have, will be frozen. You will lose your passports. And you will, in all likelihood, go to prison. These papers are your only path to a life that does not involve a jail cell. I suggest you take it. For a long time, the only sound was Leo's quiet weeping. Eleanor stared at me, her eyes searching my face for a crack, a glimmer of the mother she had known, the woman who had always eventually forgiven. She found nothing. The woman she was looking for had been left to die on a desert road. I had taken her place. She reached for the pen first. Her signature, once a confident, stylish flourish, was now a jagged, angry scratch on the paper. Leo followed, his hand trembling so badly he could barely hold the pen. Tears dripped onto the pages as he signed his future away. They wrote their letters on the legal pads David provided, their backs hunched in on themselves like scolded children. I did not read them. I did not want to. When they were finished, they pushed the papers and the pads back across the desk. They were empty shells. Now what? Michael had asked in a whisper. My Leo was too broken to speak. Now you leave, I said, standing up. You will go back to the house, pack only your personal belongings, and you will be gone from Sedona by morning. If I ever see either of you in this town again, our agreement is void, and I will call the district attorney. This is not your home anymore. You are not welcome here. They left without another word. They walked out of the office not as siblings, but as two separate, defeated individuals, united only by the wreckage they had created. I watched from the window as they got into Eleanor's car, not speaking, not looking at each other, and drove away. It's over, David said softly, placing the signed documents into a thick envelope. No, I replied, still looking out the window at the empty street. It's just beginning. Returning to my house that evening was one of the strangest experiences of my life. It was my home, every book and every piece of furniture a part of me. Yet it felt tainted by their presence, by their conspiracy. The smell of Eleanor's expensive perfume lingered in the air, a cloying, artificial scent that didn't belong. A half-empty bottle of ridiculously overpriced wine sat on the kitchen counter. I walked through the room slowly, touching the familiar objects, reclaiming my space. I opened all the windows, letting the cool night air wash away the last traces of them. I changed the sheets on my bed, packed their leftover food into a box for the shelter, and erased them from my home as thoroughly as I had erased them from my life. I slept that night more deeply than I had in years, and I did not dream of them. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The story of what had happened, in its broadest strokes, had circulated through our small town and the wider bookselling community. People were outraged on my behalf, and the support was overwhelming. The bookstore was flooded with customers, old and new, who came not just to buy books, but to offer a handshake, a hug, a kind word. I did not tell them the details of my children's betrayal. I simply said we'd had a profound disagreement about the future of the store, and that I was now firmly in control. It was enough. With David's help, I formally established the Arthur Blackwood Foundation for Independent Literature, funded by a significant portion of the Barnaby Bear royalties. Our first act was to create a grant program for struggling independent bookstores across the country. Our second was to establish the Blackwood Prize for a debut novel, a fitting tribute to the man who had spent his life championing new voices. I hired a new manager for the store, a bright, passionate young woman named Sarah, who had a master's degree in literature and a brilliant mind for business. She was everything my own children were not: hardworking, humble, and deeply in love with the world of books. She brought fresh energy and new ideas, starting a popular podcast from the store and expanding our online presence, all while honoring the traditions Arthur and I had built. Life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. The bookstore thrived, becoming more than just a shop, but a true community hub. We hosted author events, children's story hours, and workshops. The quiet rooms of my home were once again filled with the warmth of friends and the aroma of baking bread, not the cold chill of conspiracy. I rarely thought of them. Occasionally, news would trickle back to me through the grapevine. David heard from a colleague in Los Angeles that Eleanor's wellness brand had collapsed. Without the steady infusion of cash from me, her creditors had closed in, and her online empire, built on a foundation of lies and debt, had crumbled. The last anyone heard, she was working as a personal assistant for a more successful influencer, a humiliating fall from grace. Leo's fate was more dramatic. His jilted investors in San Francisco, unwilling to write off their losses, had pursued him legally. He was facing charges of wire fraud and misrepresentation. His grand technological dreams had ended, as all his dreams had, in a catastrophic and expensive failure. I felt no satisfaction at their downfall, no schadenfreude. I felt only a profound and weary sadness for the two people they could have been, for the family we once were. Their ruin was not my victory. It was the inevitable consequence of the choices they had made. One evening, about a year after they had left, I was sitting in my favorite armchair in the bookstore, long after we had closed for the day. The lights were low, and the scent of paper and ink was a comforting embrace. I was looking at a photograph of Arthur and me, taken on the day we first opened the store. We were so young, so full of hope and dreams. I thought about the path my life had taken, the deep valley of grief and betrayal I had been forced to walk through. The woman on the desert road felt like a different person, a stranger from a distant past. I had not just survived. I had been reborn. I had taken the legacy my husband and I had built together and made it stronger, more meaningful. I had transformed my pain into purpose. The phone buzzed on the table beside me. It was an unknown number, a text message. Mom, I know I'm not supposed to. I'm in trouble. Please. Can you help me? I looked at the message from my son for a long moment. Then, without a flicker of hesitation, I deleted it and blocked the number. Some choices, once made, can never be unmade. Some bridges, once burned, leave no path back. My family now was the community that filled this store every day, the authors we championed, the young readers whose imaginations we helped to ignite. My children were the countless stories that lined these shelves, stories of courage, of resilience, of love, and of loss. That is my family. That is my legacy. And it is more than enough. That's my story. And I tell it not to invite pity, but to share a hard-won truth. Some people will see kindness as a weakness to be exploited, a resource to be drained. They will mistake a mother's love for a blank check. But true strength isn't about endless forgiveness. Sometimes, it's about drawing a line in the sand and refusing to let anyone cross it, not even your own blood. What would you have done? Could you have found it in your heart to forgive them? Or would you, like me, have chosen to protect the legacy over the family that tried to destroy it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening to my story today. I'll be back here tomorrow, as I am every day, with a new story to share. So be sure to follow Grandma's Daily Story and click that little notification bell so you don't miss a thing. You never know what life might have in store.